Hello everyone, I'm Pallavi, a final year student at Geetham University, Hyderabad. And my academic journey has been shaped by questions of gender, history and language of the body. My research explored dressing and ornamentation of the Devadasi system where culture, power and womanhood meet. Today's conversation is about feminism, and it's not a slogan but as a quiet presence in everyday life choices made and voices heard. Our today's guest is a scholar whose work has patiently traced women's lives across time through history, religion and social change, reminding us feminism is not imported but deeply rooted in lives and realities. This podcast is an invitation to listen, reflect and rethink equality gently, honestly and without fear. It is a privilege to welcome Professor Rekha Pandey, Professor of History and Gender Studies. Ma'am, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. It's great to be here.
My first question, ma'am, how did your journey into history and women's studies begin?
Well, Pallavi, I am talking of a period much before, I am sure before you were born. As a student of class 9th, when I am talking about 69, 70, we used to have co-education with the boys. We studied together, we beat them in everything, we used to get more marks. But there was a subject called, I think, socially productively useful work or something, where the boys were taught to repair a scooter, to repair a bulb, and we were taught to stitch, knit, hem. And I found it very unjust. Why can't we learn what the boys are doing? So we all walked up, I took the girls, there were only 5 of us. We walked to the principal and we said we'd also like to learn what the boys are doing. And the principal said that, look, I cannot decide on this. I'll have to write a letter to the Board of Secondary Education in Delhi. And when they wrote a letter, after 2-3 months, we got a reply saying, no, girls have to do only these things. To me, they had divided the work based on gender. At that time, I don't think I had that clarity. But any kind of injustice disturbed me, and I felt that it was not right. You saw so much of injustice in families between girls and boys, how they were treated. And these are life skills. Today there are so many boys in the hostel, their pants also tear, their buttons also fall. If they know stitching, they can also help. And if we know how to repair a bulb or other things, it would help. So rather than these kinds of division, what is important that we impart these life skills to all. So I think that had a lot of impact. And we were at Allahabad, this is a place where Sangam is there. Many relatives would come to have a holy dip in the Ganges. And those days people didn't stay in hotels, they would stay in the houses. And I saw an old aunt, she must be 70 at that time, who had come to stay with us to take bath in the Ganges. She was a widow, and I came to know that she had become a widow when she was 7 years old. She was staying in Vrindavan, and she would just get up in the morning early before sunrise. She would just take a flour, mix it with little milk, salt, and she would have 2 chapatis with tea. And the same thing in the evening before sunset, she will make 2 chapatis, eat them. And we were eating all kinds of things. When I asked my mother, why is it that she is not able to eat what we are eating? She says, no, it's like this only. This is how tradition is. The way we treated widows, I knew it was not right. Something was very wrong. And my mother would always, tell me, oh, you speak too much. This is how it is. At that time, we had no subject like women's studies. We didn't even know, I'm talking about 69, 70s. Yeah. This subject came in much later. But I knew that there were things which were wrong and we need to really question them. And I think from that time onwards, there was a lot of interest which came in. And in 1984, I joined the University of Hyderabad. I used to have a 1.5-year-old son. And there were no crushes like today. There was a family which would keep 5-6 children. So I used to leave my son there and go to the university. We were in Abbots those days at the Golden Threshold. One day, I don't know what happened. I came back early. It was about 11:30. There were 10 or 15 children in the crush and all of them were naked. The moment the mothers would leave, they would remove the clothes of the children because they would otherwise soil and there would be a lot of work for these people. And I was so upset. I think I just stayed home for a week. And when we were talking about this to another friend, she was very much associated with the trade union movement. She just asked one question. She said, Rekha, it is so easy for you to stay back home because you are working not because you need a work, but because you want to do something with your life. Can you imagine what happens to women who have to work for survival and they have the issue of childcare? How do they manage? And that really made me think. Another colleague of mine, we drafted a proposal, we submitted, we looked at childcare facilities, and we were really shocked that these were issues which were not at all important to the corporate, to the organization. And we, submitted our report. Chandana Khan was the director of Women and Child Welfare Department in Andhra Pradesh at that time. And one day we get a call from her office. We both went there. She had called some NGOs, she had called some women, government officials. She had read our reports. Though, the report was meant for Delhi, we had sent a copy. We were young and brash, I think, at that time. We sent a copy to her also. She had underlined, marked, and we started 2 creches for construction workers. So we felt so happy that maybe this is how things go. And that took me into a long journey of doing lot of projects. Some were successful, some were just kept in shells. So, maybe it is the injustice which was happening in society as far as gender is concerned that made me look into these areas.
So primarily your childhood, your aunt was the inspiration we would
Yes,
consider it
definitely.
And then we'll move to our next question. Was there a moment or a person who inspired you to choose this field?
Like I told you, when we were young or when we got into colleges and our career, there was nothing like a person because the subject didn't occur. Yes, there were lots of girls who felt there was injustice, we need to fight it, but we didn't know how to go about it. So I think it is everyone's personal journeys in their lives, where they wanted to look at this injustice that moved us. But if you say one person, I don't think there is a single person that I can name.
Then how would you define it? Like, would you gonna define it as a group of female entities, or there will be one person, right, ma'am, who must have inspired you? Is it your mom or someone or something like that which triggered you to just go with this?
No, definitely. See, in families you come across very strong women. Like when I look at my mother, she is a very strong woman. And then you meet, like I gave you an example, so many aunts who in some way, there are lots of men also in the families, when they have such misogynistic views and all that also impacts you. When you move into universities, you meet lot of friends, and we used to be a very different group. We were interested so many things. We were not just interested in works like many of the girls which you would see. They were only in the 69 and 70s, marriage was the only important institution, and you are just studying till the time you get married. Very few girls have their own ambition that they want to do something with their lives. And so, maybe in these we did have a group of young girls who were very ambitious. They wanted to make something of their life. They wanted to bring about a change in society, and a lot of these inspiration did shape me, I think.
Okay, ma'am. And then let's move to another question. Ma'am, after so many years of your work, what still excites you the most?
See, I have done research, and I think research does excite me because you feel that yes, you are in a way, contributing to knowledge, you are trying to make a difference. And especially when I talk of history, when we started our careers, there was nothing like women's history at that time. We were only talking of political history, from the Allahabad School of History where we come from. We were only focusing on political history. And then slowly we move into social history, we look at economic history. And I realized as I was teaching in class that, history only talks about from based on, you know, what records you have, what documents you have, because history has its own method of you know, research and how do you go about it. But then since we look at the world, you know, the world is divided into a public space and private space. We think that the public space belongs to men, and anything which happens in the private space is not important. And since history is in the public space, so it is only, you know, women just become silent participants in the whole process. They are not contributing anything. So with that kind of an understanding, it is history is only talking about his story. There's nothing about her story in that. So unless we add her story, we will not get our story. So that is something which excited me, and I think I started looking at religion. We were talking so much about the you know, women saints and what they contributed, but we were looking at it through a prism of, you know, religion, or maybe literature had done some work. We were, little philosophy was talking about it. But you know, looking at these women, how they were, you know, questioning society at that time. We have all these concepts of, you know, Sati Savitri, you know, women being pativratas, and that's the kind of narrative that went on in history about women. But here in 12th century, you had women like Akka Mahadevi in Karnataka, who, you know, I am using A.K. Ramanujam's translation, who says, take these husbands who decay and die and throw them into your kitchen fires. So she's so independent. And many of these women were beyond gender. You know, Dasamai says, if they see beards and whiskers, they call it a man. If they see long hair and breasts, they call it a woman. But look at the spirits within, is neither a man nor women. In another poem, Akka Mahadevi says, take a long bamboo, cut it into two, call the upper half a woman and the lower half a man. Now kindle them together and burn a fire. Now tell me, is that fire a man or a woman? So many of the women are beyond gender, but still the way society is looking at them, because they are not following a pattern, they are not following the path that is expected of women. Look at the case of Meera. You know, there are attempts to kill her, there are attempts to, you know, look down upon her. And so my first, you know, this made me really think, and I started looking at religion. Then I published on how these women were questioning patriarchy, how they were negotiating patriarchy. And in fact, you know, women continuously, in spite of being a patriarchal society, in spite of the fact that there were so many restrictions on women throughout history, women have negotiated. They have challenged patriarchy in their own way. They have created a space for themselves. So that is something very fascinating about history that we have.
So ma'am, as you mentioned, where Akka Mahadevi has told something like take a bamboo and cut it into half. So one question has raised. Can I, like, shall we proceed?
Yeah, please.
Like, the question goes like, okay, as marriage as an institution, where men and women both are required to get into a legal contract while getting marriage. What if, like, men mostly dominate women, right, in the field of marriage as an institution, whatever it might be. So what's your take on this?
No, see, if you look at it in the whole marriage system, in Hinduism, marriage is not a contract. You marry a person not for just for this life, but for 7 lives. You know, you can't break that contract. That's how it's understood. Islam, yes, it's a contract, and if the contract doesn't work, you can break it. And they don't look down upon widows. We look down upon widows so badly. You know, you marry that person for 7 lives, you cannot remarry again. And so, you know, if you look at the social reform movement, widow marriage became remarriage became a big issue at that time, because they realized young girls like 1 year, 2 years would become widow, and they were leading these kinds of, you know, life. They were either sent to Banaras or Vrindavan. So unless we reform and bring about a change in the lives of these women, our society is not going to move forward. So in Islam, it is a contract, but again, Islam in India, because it was very much influenced by even Hinduism, and there is a totally, you know, they also speak of, you know, you cannot really break that marriage. So unfortunately, in a marriage, if it's a question of a power relationship, unless there is an equality built into that marriage, it will really not work. And we have divided it, like how I said, you know, this is the public sphere, this is the private sphere. Women will do these things, men will do these things. If we kind of, you know, combine, see, after all, it is the house which belongs to both. And both husband and wife have to contribute to that, whether it is cooking, cleaning, taking care of children. And if they participate as equal partners, I think it's really going to be a very different kind of scenario that we will have.
Yes, ma'am, that was like really nice. But public and private sector, when we talk about both, or when we dive into deep, I think these both of them are constructed by social constructivism or something like that.
Yes, definitely. See, when you say we make a lot of difference between sex and gender.
Yeah.
Sex is something you are born naturally into. You know, you're born a girl or a boy. And since this is natural, you cannot change it. That's what we say. But gender is something which society has constructed over that. You know, so women give birth to children is because of sex. But women take care of children is because of gender. So, you know, it's very obvious that it is a social construct. It keeps changing throughout centuries, throughout periods. And that is what one is questioning. See, unfortunately, because of this public-private divide, we have, you know, divided the world, saying that, you know, what is important, militarism, whatever is happening outside, men become very important, and women, things like, you know, childbearing, taking care of children, put into it, you know, handicrafts, all these are not important because these are women's work. Later on, you know, when I look at, I brought out a book on BD workers. You know, these are women who are continuously working. It's not that easy. See, making a BD is a difficult process. The contractor just comes, he throws the leaves in their house. And I'll just explain to you the whole process. The women have to cut the, you know, take out the leaves from those branch. They have to soak it in the water throughout the night, then dry it the next day. Then they have to take a scissors, cut the edges. They have to put nicotine powder in that, fold it, and then just a thread is given to them. They have to make balls out of it, and then you tie the string. See, by doing this much work for one BD, imagine how much labor is involved. For making 1,000 BDs, when I started my work in 1991-92, they were paid 40 rupees for making 1,000 BDs. And today they are paid only 110 rupees for making 1,000 BD. So all that labor, we don't count it at all. And we regard this as women's work. I was traveling in Nizamabad. There is a family where there are 3 sons. They are all unemployed. They have studied till 10th, 11th, and they don't have a job. The father is also, you know, driving an auto. He also doesn't have a regular job. The whole family runs on the income of this girl and the mother who make these BDs throughout the day. So I just asked this boy, I said, why don't you help in making the BDs? Then they can make more BDs. So he turns around and says, Madam, kya baat kar rahe? Ye to auraton ka kaam hote na. So this whole notion of what is women's work, the boys will help in taking those BDs to the contractor, getting it weighed, getting the money. In the factories, they will help in, you know, bundling, packaging. But making BDs is only women's work. So this whole notion of what is women's work, what is men's work is something which is there. And we need to break these stereotypes.
Then why do you think they have generalized work according to the gender? Like female should do this work and men should do this work. What probably makes it?
See, you know, like I told you, it is primarily this division between public and private, that, you know, the public is more important and it is a field which is dominated. Private is something which women do. And because of these, you know, we have this whole notion of, let me give you an example. How do we define work? Work is something which economists have told us, for you get paid. So if I go to a university or a college, I give a lecture and I'm teaching there, I get a salary, that is work. But if I'm teaching my own children, after all, that's my work. If I go and cook in someone else's house, you know, that is, I get a salary, that becomes work. But if I'm cooking in my own house, after all, that's my duty. So, you know, that is because something for which you get paid. And women are in most of these areas, they are not paid anything. You know, they do it out of, you may call it love, service. We have given different kinds of names to this, but it is undervalued and they are not paid for it. So, all these things also have a lot of impact at the natural policy level. See, what happened earlier when they would take the census, they would go home and ask a women, what do you do? And women say, oh, I do nothing. Because women also internalize a lot of these values. So they would go and say, okay, nothing, nothing, nothing. And out of those 100 women, 10, some of them are teachers, some of them are doctors, some of them are engineers. So when we calculated the gross national product of our country, it came to so few. There were so few women who were working. Then there was a big demand from the women's movement. And in 2005, I still remember we had lots of agitation. Letters were submitted. And in 2011, when the census was collected, they didn't just ask a women, what do you do? Because women also internalize, say, oh, I do nothing. And then if who does the washing? It's the women do. Who does the cleaning? The women do. Who does the cooking? Women. But then again, they think, well, I do nothing because they are not getting a salary. Yes. So they went, and in that census data, they went home and asked a woman, how do you spend your time? Then she says, okay, 1 hour I do cooking, 1 hour I do management, and those we calculate for whatever financial worth it is, and the contribution of women into the gross national product. So it's very important. We need to really change these definitions. These are coming down from ages. Unfortunately, if you look at all our knowledge stream, it is men who have defined knowledge. They are the ones who say, and Kumkum Bhavani has used a very interesting term called edit. She says we have erased the contribution of women, we have deleted it, and we have ignored whatever they have contributed. And at the most, there is some amount of tokenism. So, we need to question all these stereotypes and how is it that we are looking at women.
Okay, ma'am, everything is fascinating, and let's move towards your works. And we have very few questions on your works because we gone through very few, and you wrote more or less 20 books and 200 articles, research papers, like that. Okay, ma'am. First question goes like, even after legal recognition of third gender, why does everyday violence against hijras remain largely unchanged?
See, unfortunately, it's not that easy to bring about a change. Just a law cannot bring about a change. When we talk of these questions, even for that matter, not only hijras, even gender, there's so much domestic violence which happens. How are we looking at it? Because it has all to do with the power relationship in a family. Many of the women think that, if they are being beaten, because they are not worth it, and this is their lot, they can't do anything about it. So it continues. What is very important is the change in the mindset, and unfortunately that's not so easy to change. The law just does not change your mindset. We have a very patriarchal society right from beginning, but where there is a lot of importance given to a son. A daughter is not that important in a family. If you look at the whole Hindu system, we have divided life into these 4 stages, the brahmacharya, grahastha ashram, sannyas, and then vanaprastha and sannyas. So in the grahastha ashram, it is very important for a family to pay their debts to their ancestors, to God, and to their gurus. And in all these 3 things, a son is very important. Okay. A daughter cannot participate in these rituals. A father can pass on his debts to his son, but he cannot pass it on to his daughter. So this is the whole way in which our earlier societies had written. And if you look at all the prayers, when the wife becomes pregnant, in the other way, they go and pray, and both husband and wife go and pray, and they say, oh God, give us a son here and a daughter elsewhere. Okay. And there are so many, women are asked to keep so many vrats so that she can give birth to a son. Even today, if you look at it, in states like Punjab and Haryana, we've had such a skewed sex ratio because so much of importance is given to a son, and daughters are not given that value. Look at the proverbs of any region. In Telugu, there is a Telugu proverb, bringing up a daughter is like watering plants in someone else's garden. So it's, if you tell lies, you'll have a daughter. So there is a continuation because there is no change in mindset.
Okay.
All these things happen. So we need to, with education, with kind of the more economic development, we also need to focus on a change in the mindset, and only then things will change.
Yeah.
Another point I want to bring about is, how have we defined masculinity? In the Asian context, we have defined masculinity in the context of women. See what happened in partition. Many of the Muslim men went and raped Hindu women. Hindu men went and raped Muslim women. Their body parts were cut. And it was not because that they wanted to take revenge from these women. They wanted to send a lesson to the other community that you are not man enough to protect your women. And the same thing happens today. If there is a caste war or something, it's primarily the women who get raped and all, because we have defined in the Asian context masculinity at the expense of women. And women become the keepers of that whole morality, the whole society, the family values. And this is how we look upon it. So we need to bring about that change in the mindset.
Okay, ma'am. As you mentioned something about rape, I have a question. If rape is used as a tool of patriarchal power, why is women's honor and virginity invoked even in men's conflicts? And why are survivors forced into silence to protect family and social prestige?
Yeah, see, it's very important, like I said, our notion. One, you have to understand the whole notion of, masculinity, femininity, and under the name of honor. We don't want to talk about these things, because you always blame the girl. But now I see a lot of change. If you look at the newspapers and all, many women are at least coming out and reporting when there is a rape taking place. Few decades back, people did not even want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So some change has occurred in our society, but still not the way we would want it to change, because we have linked women's honor with maintaining the family. We think family is a very sacred institution, and so many women do not come up. Even today, if you look at domestic violence, how much of it is reported? It's not that easy to just go to a police station and report violence. It's only reported at the last stage.
Yeah.
So it's very important to dismantle all these structures and bring about this new kind of change.
Yeah, and I think changes will never come across the way. They will take a long time. And there is one more question, ma'am, I would love to ask you. We often celebrate women who break the glass ceiling, like Indira Gandhi or Margaret Thatcher. But does women individual rise to power necessarily improve the lives of ordinary women, or can patriarchal system remain intact even with women at the top?
Yeah, see, unfortunately, whether few women at the top will certainly not bring about a lot of change, because patriarchal institutions continue. And unless these are dismantled, if I go back into history, see, imagine that stage where, we were converting from primates to human beings. In the early society, there is a lot of worship of mother goddesses.
Yeah.
They are worshipped. If you look at all these Bhimbetka, cave paintings, etc., they are all using ochre, red color. Because, men did not understand the role of women. She was almost seen as a goddess who would give life to a child. And since they didn't understand these development, this is much before the days of surrogacy and IVF and all, they saw a mother giving birth. So in all these earlier societies, women were treated as goddesses, and all these societies worshipped mother goddesses. Cave paintings have ochre color. Menstruation was looked upon with lot of fear. Because if you look at it, today if you see an animal giving birth, they walk on fours.
Yeah.
And within few seconds, you know, the dog or the cat or the kid is able to walk on their own. But because of a erect posture, the birth canal of a women became very narrow. So a human child is born at a much more level of infancy than the animal child. So a woman had to really take care of the child, feed it, and she almost had that power like a goddess. But then, as Gerda Lerner talks in a book, Creation of Patriarchy, and you know, Engels also refers to this as the greatest day of the defeat of mother's right, when private property comes in, when these archaic states come in, you know, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Syria, other places later on in Greece and Rome, they are replaced by male goddess, because these are societies which are governed by a class of individuals who are aristocrats. They own all the land and property, they have all the power in their hand, and they want to pass it on to their sons. Now how do you ensure that the son is yours? By controlling the women.
Yeah.
Because there is a proof of matriarchy that this is the mother, but how do you prove patriarchy? So there is a control of women, and it is from that time. We have seen so many changes in our society, from, you know, ancient mode of production, slave mode of production, feudalism, then, you know, capitalist mode of production, socialist mode of production. But from that time, when mother's rights are replaced by patriarchy, patriarchy continues, it doesn't change. Very rarely have we seen a shift from, we have seen a lot of shifts from matriarchy to patriarchy,
Yeah.
but never from patriarchy to
matriarchy.
matriarchy. I have a lot of people who will say, no, in Kerala we have, you know, the women play a very important role. But some of my students have worked on these issues. Again, it is the brother who controls rather than the husband. So, you know, it's very difficult to do away with these kinds of division, and we've always had these divisions and, you know, the power structures that are built into it. And so, you know, you have a lot of these issues that come up with these.
Yeah. So one more question, ma'am. Let's take it a bit not controversial. Let's move into a bit religious perspective. So Radha is celebrated as a supreme devotee. Does her representation reinforce the idea of womanhood lies in emotional surrender rather than autonomy?
See, if you look at the kinds of writing, you know, there is a lot of, when Radha is writing, and to me, you know, all these women, the women saints who were writing at that time, they were negotiating patriarchy, and many of them they were tied into a mortal man in relationship of a husband. They could not really question that, so they posit those relationship to God. So God becomes their lover, as in the case of Akama Devi. God becomes their friend, as in the case of many of the Maharashtrian Bhakti. God becomes their husband, as in the case of Mirabai. And they look upon all of them, whether it is Lal Ded, Mahadevi Akka, Mirabai, Bahinabai, they are all questioning these relationship with these mortals, and they posit those relationship into a different realm. So even when, you know, we look at Radha or Radha's surrender, there's nothing wrong in that kind of a, you know, emotional bonding and all, as long as she is able to negotiate and, you know, get that kind of a freedom or autonomy that she is trying for.
So ma'am, I have a question, like, what's the relationship between a devotee and God? Is it give and take relationship, or what is it?
See, it's very interesting, you know, when you look at this relationship, many of the Marxist thinkers, you know, Professor Sharma says, you know, he almost defines the relationship of a feudal lord and a servant, you know, because when a person is doing puja, according to him, you know, you are surrendering to that God, and with no questions asked, there is a total surrender. And he is looking at it in a very Marxist kind of a framework. But definitely, you know, if you look at the Ramayana, you know, the whole devotion of Hanuman to Ram.
Ram.
No, it reaches a point where, you know, Hanuman becomes the leader and Ram becomes the follower.
Yeah.
You know, he becomes indispensable. So that relationship is something very important. So it's not just, you know, when you are surrendering, you surrender in such a way that these whole relationships kind of change. It gives a lot of emotional support, but it also releases you from the bondage of the world.
So one more last question I would like to ask. The question goes like, your research spans topic from Devadasis to bangle makers to trafficking. How do you connect these diverse subjects in understanding women's experiences historically?
See, that's a very good question. One, like I told you, you know, we have to recreate women's history because all the archives, all the documentation, all the material that is available is only about men's history. We think, you know, that men's history is the universal human history, and all the concepts, all the experiences, all the priorities only talk about men. There is hardly any documentation about women which is available. So to set the record straight and say that yes, women have also contributed to the past, women have also contributed, we have to look into different kinds of issues. To me, you know, history is not something which just happens in the past. My interest is also connected to the present day, where I see a lot of, you know, continuation of these kinds of inequalities, where, you know, there is a subordination of women and dominance of men. It continues till the present day time. And so, you know, in order to make a little contribution, whatever, through my writing or to my teaching, through my research, you know, we try to set the record straight and say that yes, they have also made a lot of contribution. So, you know, when history is okay, you look at documentation, you are looking at the past, but then this interest in the past is also connected with the interest in present, where you see a lot of disparity between girls and boys in families and societies and structures, and you question all that. So that leads me to different areas where I'm looking at you know, the contribution of women, whether it is in bangle making, zari making, beadi making, or women in construction, and how they contribute to the whole family economy, to the whole national economy. And these are areas where we need to really highlight, and only then when we are able to talk about that, yes, these are the areas where women have contributed, we will get a holistic picture of women's contribution to society.
Yeah. And ma'am, let's wrap it up. Ma'am, what do you want your legacy to be?
Okay, my legacy, I think, is my students. I'm very proud of the fact that 14 of my students are teaching in 14 different universities in the country. They are all teaching courses on religion, society, gender, and they are, you know, also training a large number of students, because now I have students who are guiding PhD students. A lot of students are working with them. 2 of my students are head of the departments, they become professors. So, you know, in the last 40 years, I've had a large number of students. Many of them are principals in colleges, teaching in different colleges, universities. And so I think my legacy is that they carry forward this work. They are really interested in women's history. I have students from Northeast, Odisha, Allahabad, Osmania, you know, and all of them do a lot of work in women's history. They are trying to bring about changes in the syllabus, and they bring out all these issues, and I hope they are carrying forward the work which I started.
And the other question, what message would you like to give to young students listening today?
Okay, see, one, I think we need to, you know, where does the change begin? You know, change doesn't come from outside, from international, national. We have to bring about a change from within. And today, you know, I deal with so many students, I see so many people. We are very savvy. We know what to speak politically right. We may not change within, but we know what to speak right in a public forum. Let the change begin with us. You know, we need to teach. Many of my students say, ma'am, today I have no control. I don't believe in taking dowry, but if my parents take, what can I do? I'm so emotionally tied in that family. So I used to tell them, fine. They said, let the girls decide what to do. It's their issue. I used to tell them, fine. Today it is the girls' issue because the girls are getting married. But tomorrow, when you are getting your daughter married, will you say it is her issue or your issue? So the first thing I want to tell the young students, there is nothing like women's issues. These are societal issues. We need to focus on our society, and if we are able to bring about a change in our society, I think it will bring about a change in from the families, it will move to communities, to society, to the nation and international level at large. We dream of a world where there is an equality between men and women, where we don't have these notions of who is dominant and who is subordinate. So this is something which we all can participate, we all can do. Let's teach our children to speak up. The boys should learn to help the girls at home. Why should we think that cooking, cleaning, dusting is only girls' work? Boys also need to learn how to cook, how to help, and they also should help at home in doing these tasks. So we need to teach our girls to break that silence, the boys also to assist. And if we start with ourselves, the change comes from us, then automatically it will move outwardly, and we hope to see a different society where and it will benefit all. A society where there is no violence, where women are not looked down upon. When we talk of violence, let me tell you, violence is not just beating a woman. It has lot of implication, political implication, social implication, economic implications. When a women are beaten in that society, what control will they have on their lives to take decisions on nutrition, family, others? And if when violence happens, women have to be treated in hospital, you have to go to a lawyer, it involves lot of economic costs. Women are not able to go to work. So we have to interpret violence in the sense that it has a lot of social, economic and political costs. And if we change our perspective in looking into issues, I am sure a change will come. And the young girls and boys can play a very important role in saying that, yes, I will be that agent of change. I'm sure you've heard that story where, you have these thousands and lakhs of crabs that are come on the sea side, and there's a young boy who goes and throws them into the sea, and a politician who comes and he says, but what difference is it going to make? There are lakhs and lakhs of these crabs which are out there. And he says, no, it's going to make a difference to that crab. So we need to think about that. Let's start from a small scale, and I'm sure it will grow into a big movement.
Yes, ma'am. And one more question. If this podcast inspires even one single girl to study or dream bigger, what would you want her to hear from you?
Well, I hope it inspires, and yes, let's take control of our own destiny. Why is it, for a girl right from the beginning, it is others who decide how much you will study, when you will get married, to whom you will get married, how will you lead your life. Let's learn to take our own decisions. And if we have that kind of a empowerment which we built into it, I'm sure society is going to change. So let's start in a very small way. Let us become conscious, let us become aware, and only then, a change will occur.
Ma'am, thank you for being with us. I would like to end this talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you
so
very much.
much.